Stop! Move away from the cookie jar.
Yo, state capitalism. Let's have a little chat about that. So, context. The Bolsheviks, when they came to power as Sovnarkom, had inherited an economy that was breaking down. It's a society that was under incredible strain. Um, fuel and food shortages had become critical. Many aspects of a regular state managed economy had ceased to function under the provisional government. And in that regard, over the course of 1917, the Bolsheviks had tried to make things worse in order to undermine the provisional government. But now that they were the established authorities, they had to deal with that. Another part of the context for the first initial economic policies of the Bolsheviks was what else was going on contextually, and that was a really profound social revolution. So that means the actions taken by everyday ordinary people. So the ways in which soldiers were forming their own revolutionary committees to have some control over their lives, the way in which the peasants were engaged in seizing the land, that's that agrarian revolution, the way workers were forming workers' committees and implementing workers' control to manage their own economies, their own workplaces. And running alongside that is the Bolsheviks' sense that they needed to impose control in order to be able to shape the revolutionary regime. What to do economically?
Stop! Move away from the cookie jar.
Wasn't immediately clear. So the Bolsheviks, it took them some months to work out what they were actually doing. It wasn't until April that they formalized their first initial economic policies. And in fact, the Bolshevik leadership were divided over what to do. So Nikolai Bukharin, who we'll come to know a little bit more, and his close buddy Preobrazhensky, they wanted to and pushed for a full socialist economic program. Lenin didn't believe that was practical, or he might say call that pragmatic. So by April 1917, a system that Lenin called state capitalism was in place. And this was a mixed economy. That's the most important takeaway thing. That was a mix of socialism and capitalist practices. So the state part of that refers to the socialist aspects. And that meant that the government would control key industries. It retained ownership of particularly heavy industry, transport. It nationalised, so that means it took full control of the banking and fiscal policies. So that's all. There's no share trading. There's no private banks anymore. They're all owned by the government. There was a government body appointed to oversee the economy. So this is one of the key features of a centralised economy. It was called Vysenka, which is the acronym for the Supreme Council of the National Economy, and that was established in early December 1917, and that was to supervise the economy. And another aspect of what was seen as socialist was workers' control, and that was the way in which workers' committees would help supervise the managing of their industries. Now, let's get on to the capitalist element.
Stop! Move away from the cookie jar.
So where we've got those aspects of state or socialist principles at play, there was also capitalist aspects. So Lenin wanted, and his supporters wanted, most business owners and managers to remain in their jobs, to continue to run their industries. They were so-called bourgeois experts.
Stop! Move away from the cookie jar.
Who actually knew what they were doing economically. So Lenin encouraged them to remain. Lenin talked about that the structures and technique of the capitalist free market would remain. So there was no major change in the economic foundations. And the other really key important idea that Lenin talked about, that the government would establish monopoly, so control over some aspects of the economy, but there was at the same time large sections remained in the free market. Now let's have a look at the way in which Lenin justified and explained this, and brace yourselves because this is wordy. So go along. This is in your textbook. So Lenin's explaining what and justifying what state capitalism is. State monopoly capitalism. I can't even state. State monopoly capitalism, so that's state capitalism. State monopoly capitalism inevitably and unavoidably implies a step or several steps towards socialism. If a large capitalist enterprise becomes a monopoly, it means it serves the whole nation. If it's become a state monopoly, it means the state directs the whole enterprise. In whose interests? In the interests of the revolutionary democracy, and that will be a step towards socialism. Socialism is nothing but state capitalist monopoly which has been turned into the interest of the whole people and has therefore ceased to be a capitalist monopoly.
Stop! Move away from the cookie jar.
What's he talking about? What Lenin is saying then is there is aspects of capitalism within this system, state capitalism, but what Lenin is trying to explain that its purpose is different. It's functioning with a socialist purpose and is a transitional stage towards socialism. So it's not capitalism, it's state capitalism, which is kind of, he didn't use this phrase, but you might consider like socialist capitalism, if you'd like. Now, while that's going on, one of the key themes of your area study is the challenges that emerged to the new society. State capitalism did not remain as the policy for very long. By mid-1918, it had been abandoned. One thing, the whole point of it was to maintain the functions of the economy, to revive production. It didn't do that, and there will also be a civil war. One of the things that's undermining state capitalism is actually popular pressures. There's a really good statistic here. So for every factory that was formally nationalised, taken over control by the Workers' Control Decree, 4 more were pushed into nationalisations by the workers themselves. So this was a trend that was called nationalisations from below. So the workers were giving their industry to the government, kicking out the managers and going, ta-da! You now own this. And the Vysenka, the Supreme Council of the Economy, was like, oh crap, we're suddenly having to manage a lot more of the economy that we thought that we did.
Stop! Move away from the cookie jar.
So this cookie jar, he's in there to give a little flavour of the capitalist element to it. But while Lenin is willing to tolerate a little bit of cookie jar, the workers themselves and the breakdown in the economy is pushing the government, Sovnarkom, to implement a far more centralised set of principles, and they will become the formal policy by mid-1918, and that will be war communism. And that's all for today. YOLO! Stay fully sick or not fully sick. До свидания.
Stop! Move away from the cookie jar.